Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki says his people are suffering colonialism and apartheid under the Israelis. He told the UN's top court to order an immediate and unconditional end to Israel's occupation. The ICJ is holding hearings all week on the legal implications of Israel's occupation since 1967, with an unprecedented 52 countries, including the United States and Russia, expected to give evidence. Israel will not participate in the hearings, but submitted a written contribution dated July 24, 2023, in which it urged the court to dismiss the request for an opinion.
The entirety of Israel's colonial occupation regime is on trial today. Not just the apartheid, colonization and persecution by which it is brutally imposing it on the Palestinian people. An unprecedented number of countries are participating in the proceedings, taking a stand for justice and peace. The deliberations today are long overdue. For the Palestinian people, no less than their survival and future are at stake as they endure Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, carried out with a cruelty that shocks the conscience and with total impunity, in grave breach of international law and flagrant violation of the ICJ provisional measures ordered in the case brought by South Africa against Israel. If the court declares this occupation illegal, as we expect, it will be incumbent upon states to take action pursuant to the court's ruling. This will help bring the occupation to an immediate, unconditional, and total end.
Well, for more on this, let's cross live now to Tel Aviv and speak with our special correspondent, Karl Bostic. Karl, good to see you, and thanks as always. Well, quite a lot happening there. The Palestinians are also pushing, trying to see how they can use through the courts to get the Israeli offensive out. And again, Israel is also giving a kind of ultimatum, which is quite strange, knowing that they haven't actually done that before, letting them know on when they will be making incursion into that area. What more do we know, Karl?
Well, you need to keep in mind this all began October 7th, the massacre here in Israel, when more than 1,200 Israelis were killed, and then more than 240 Israelis taken hostage in Gaza. No one expecting that this would become a war that would last so long. We're now in the middle of a fifth month of war. You need to keep in mind this is not about a war with Israel against Hamas in Gaza. It's got implications for, it's got consequences for the region and consequences internationally as well. So, and then we're up against the clock. We're up against the calendar. That ultimatum you talked about, Ramadan, the holy month of the Muslim calendar, is now in less than 3 weeks. That's March 10th. And yet, nearly 5 months into the war, you still have more than 130 Israelis or people hostage in Gaza, even though at the same time it said that at least a third are presumably dead, no longer alive. So, meanwhile, for an offensive, a ground offensive into Rafah, because what's also changed is this. Rafah, a town of 200,000 people on the border with Egypt. When the war began, Israel began its campaign first with Gaza City in the north, then with Khan Yunis in the central Gaza, and now we have operational control, which remains to be seen because we're still hearing scattered rockets being fired into southern Israel. So now the sights are turned into Rafah, which is now ballooned into a refugee area of more than 1.4 million people. Keep in mind the Gaza Strip alone is no more than a quarter of the size of Abuja. And when you get down to Rafah, it's an eighth the size of Abuja. And now you have 1.4 million people living there. A town of 200,000 people, most of them living in tents, in deplorable conditions. It's winter right now. Heavy rains, high winds, a lot of, diseases now spreading. So what remains to be seen is this, whether or not we'll see anything happening between now and March 10th, the deadline, to return the hostages, because There have been so many false starts that now people are impatient. Today, a video was released, taken from the beginning of the war, of the family of a 8-9 month old baby being kidnapped, and no one knows that baby's outcome. There was even video shown last week of the Hamas leader, Yahya Sinwar, with his family in Gaza going through tunnels. And speaking about the tunnels, those tunnels are as elaborate as the London Underground system, hundreds of miles of tunnels. So we're looking at, a potential bloodbath. And that's those pictures you're showing right there, right now. Sinwar and his family going through tunnels because the Israelis say that they are on the run. They are probably in Rafah. And what the Israelis are saying that if you don't return the hostages, all the hostages before Ramadan, we will begin the ground campaign against Rafah to eradicate what remains of Hamas and to ultimately maybe find even Yahya Sinwar. And to give it more intrigue to all this, Israel adding that, again, we don't know what to believe because in an Israeli perspective, they're saying that Hamas politically in Doha, Qatar, they're actually trying to sideline him. They're trying to find a replacement for Sinwar because he remains perhaps an obstacle to any reconciliation for a ceasefire deal with Israel. So we're looking at a lot of problems. But again, the last thing I would add is this. Israel is holding back, restraining itself because of pressure from the U.S. and other international allies. Because how do you move 1.4 million people out of Rafah when there's nowhere else to go? And that's why you have Egypt, which is bordering Rafah. They are now building a wall of about 10 meters high, 15, 16 feet high, in the case that Gazans try to break through the barrier, the border with Egypt, and seek shelter there. Egypt has been adamant from day one. They don't want to become a haven or refuge for Gazans for a lot of reasons. Maybe beginning with the fact that they know that if Gazans go into Egypt, Israel will not let them back in. At the same, they also know that because Gazans are controlled by Hamas, they don't want Hamas members going into Egypt. Those members who are supportive of Muslim Brotherhood are inimical to the Egyptian regime. So Egypt has really put up a ferocious fight to ensure and to warn Israel and the U.S. and other countries that by any means, if you let Gazans go into Egypt, even though we have a vast Sinai desert, that means trouble. It means even Egypt being willing to suspend its peace treaty with Israel. It's the most important Arab ally of Israel, most important Arab ally in the Middle East for the U.S. So a lot of riding on right now between what happens now and between now and March 10th, Ramadan.
Well, quite a lot happened there. And the fear here, quickly here, before I let you go, is the fight that may ultimately get into Ramadan. And if that happens, what do you think of groups like Hezbollah and the Houthi rebels jumping in on this?
Well, let me say one or two quick things. We talked about Ramadan. I'm sorry to mention it earlier. Because this is a coalition government that's very, very fragile, Ramadan is beginning March 10th. And the far-right ministers of the government are saying that the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, which is the third holiest shrine in the Muslim world, should be restricted to even Arab Israelis. In other words, fully fledged Israeli citizens who happen to be Arab. So you have another tension rising right there, where you can have a really boiling point exploding if Arab Israelis are not allowed to pray Al-Aqsa Mosque. Regarding Hezbollah, that's very interesting because we're seeing increasing crossfire in the north, which would be much, much worse war than even Hamas. But now reports that Iran has warned its proxy Hezbollah, we don't want to see any more excessive crossfire. Iran does not want a war. That's a fact. But you saw in those pictures of Al-Aqsa Mosque, they're worrying about something that could spiral out of control. On a day-to-day basis, this is a really, really tense moment. Regarding the Houthis, a British tanker, I believe a ship, was heavily damaged, was beginning to sink. So it shows that this proxy war, it's almost kind of like gotten out of control, even for Iran to handle. So it's a day-to-day thing, but it now begins with what happens with Rafah. Do you go in now before Ramadan? Do you evacuate at 1.4 million, even when you have no place to put them? And you're now restricting even Israeli citizens who happen to be Arab from even going to pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque. I mean, that's why everyone is on edge here in Israel today and Gaza and the rest of the region, not to mention internationally in the U.S.
Well, I can imagine. You stay safe, Karl Bostic. Many thanks as always for your time.